Hey everyone, and welcome to the Hytale Blueprint. So, this is going to be the very first episode of our Hytale building series, and I thought what better than to get started with teaching you guys more about Hytale's most important and foundational tool, in my opinion, the selection tool. Now, this tool kind of provides us with like the basic transformations and selections you can do, which makes it vastly superior over like traditional block placement. Now, if you take a look at this house I built over here, you can see that all four sides are very similar with very few minor edits. And what I did was I created one side and I was able to use the selection tool to paste this detail onto the other three sides. That saved me about like 3 to 4 hours and a bunch of tedious work. So I think that kind of shows how important this tool is. And without further ado, let's actually get into how to use this tool. All right, here we are at my small demo area I've created to show off this tool. And we're going to start talking about the most foundational thing you can do with this tool, which is to select things. So what you want to do is you see your pointer in the middle. You just want to hover that over a block and then hold left click. What that's going to allow you to do is as you drag your pointer, you can determine the width and length of your 2D rectangle. So I want to cover this whole selection area, and I'm just going to do that right there. Now, once I let go of my left click, I'm going to enter the depth setting. And this is where I can set how deep or shallow I want my selection to be. So if I just wanted to be the first layer of blocks, I could just left click again and this would be selected. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag my pointer all the way down here to select the entirety of this cube and then press left click again. And so now what we've done is select the entirety of the cube. Now, one important note about this selection feature is the 2D square always faces the direction of that you are. So if I'm facing the square here, you will see that the 2D square is first generated towards me, and then I have to set the depth accordingly. But if I start from here, again, the 2D square is going to face me, and then I have to set the depth, right? So, and the reason I mention that is you don't have to worry about positioning yourself in like some specific location to start the selection process. You can just start from anywhere. Now, that's the basic way to select things. And there is a small advanced way of selecting if you want, which is to use shift left click and right click. So if I go ahead and shift left click, you can see that a square is placed here. And what I can do is I can go down to the other opposite corner of my shape here. And if I shift right click, you can see the square is automatically created. So what's essentially happening is the game can kind of understand that, hey, these 2 points are opposite corners, and it kind of is able to figure out the square to create or the cube to create based off of these 2 points. So let's say I shift right click again, and it's able to create the selection. Right? So I can just keep on changing just one of my points, right? And it can just figure out the selection. I find this often much easier to use just because it's a little bit more finicky to have to first select the 2D side and then you have to manually set the depth. I think that will become a lot harder, especially when you create larger structures. Like, for example, this area that would have been kind of a pain to drag the selection all the way to create this like boundary. But let's say that we create a selection, right? And we aren't exactly satisfied. For example, this doesn't really select the entirety of my square. The game does allow us to make minor adjustments by essentially using these blue squares that appear on the cube. And what you can do is you can click on the blue square and then just drag it all the way over to kind of set the range of your selection. So there I am setting the width, And then I can use this blue square representing the bottom face to increase the depth. There you go. Okay, so there's actually two more quick things I want to talk about in regards to selecting objects. And the first is you can actually move your entire selection around. So if you actually hold shift, you will see that the blue squares turn into red squares. And what happens is when you hold on to one of these squares, you can actually move the entire selection around on that specific axis. So now I've moved it to the right, and I can move it back by selecting the square either in the front or in the back, honestly, right? Because both of these are on the same axis. And there you go. One thing you have to be super careful about is as I just kind of previously said, shift left click and right click is also used to set the two corners of your selection, right? So if you accidentally miss the square and then you shift left click, you're going to end up changing the selection area. So that's something to be especially careful of when using this. And the last quick thing with regards to selections is actually removing them, right? Because if you want to get rid of a selection, all you have to do is you have to press delete and it will just disappear. So make a selection, delete, and then you can go ahead and make your new selection. Great. Let's move on to transformations. All right, so once we've made our selection, there are two main transformations we can perform. One, which is to move our selection around, and the second is to rotate our selection. So let's start with moving our selection around, which you can do by pressing T on the keyboard once you've made your selection. And what that's going to do is kind of lock the selection to your cursor slash pointer. So as I move my cursor around, the selection will lock to my cursor. But there is a range limit. So if I kind of move my cursor over here, the wall is too far away from me, so the selection won't move that far away. Same thing over here, right? Because the game just cannot figure out where exactly is the final destination of the selection. So I will put it somewhere here on the wall, and then I can use right click to lock in my transformation. And there we go. So there is one big problem with this, right? You've seen that we have first basically merged our selection into the wall. That is one issue, right? And that's because the center of our selection hits the wall, so the surrounding area kind of gets pushed in. But the main thing is sometimes we don't have a reference point like this wall to move our selection towards. So there's a better way of actually moving things around. And let me show that right now. So I've moved my selection back, and instead of pressing T, we're going to press E. And now that brings up what I think is a much better way of moving things around, which is the arrows. So if I click and drag on this red arrow, the entire selection will move along the red axis. Same with the green and blue arrows. So move it up here, move it back here, and I don't know, move it along here. So what's happening is I now don't need a reference point. My selection won't be stuck to that reference point, and I can do things like leave my selection in midair. So because of that, I think this is a much better option. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is rotation. And by the way, I need to lock in my selection by pressing right click first. And now I can do my next transformation, which is to rotate. And as rotate starts with an R, you have to press R on your keyboard to start the rotation process. So as you can see here, we have once again the 3 axes. And if you basically click on one of the axes and kind of follow the path, it's a little bit finicky. But as you can see, I rotated along the blue axis, and you can see that my rotation has been performed. So yeah, those are the basic rotations we can do. And there are a couple more things I actually want to talk about. It's important to know that if you mess up a transformation, it's not the end of the world because, and kudos to the Hytale developers for being able to implement this, but you are able to undo your changes. So let's say I go ahead and I press T, I move my selection over here, and I absolutely hate it. It's stuck in the wall and I don't like the position. So what you can do is, for one, you can press Shift Z, and you'll need to press it a couple of times, but eventually your selection will go back to the previous location. Right? That's a huge lifesaver. You also don't have to press Shift Z. There is something else you can do. So let's say I move my selection back. You can actually type slash undo in the chat, and that also functions the same as Shift Z. Now, I find undo to be a little bit more of a hassle because you have to go ahead and type it. So I think Shift Z is the easier way to go. Lastly, there's one more thing you can do. Let's say that you are in the middle of the selection, right? You haven't locked it in by pressing right click. What you can instead do is press X on your keyboard while you are in the middle of transforming, and that will automatically prevent your transformation from taking effect. There is seriously so much just the selection tool can do. But the last thing I want to talk about for this intro video is knowing how to duplicate the blocks in your selection. Hytale currently offers two ways to do this, but one of the ways is buggy, so I'm only going to talk about the way that works. And it's pretty straightforward. So in order to move our blocks, we know that we can either press E, R, or T. All we have to do before pressing any one of these keys is to hold the Alt key. So what I'm going to do here is press Alt E, and we'll see the movement lines appeared as usual, but I'm going to hold the blue line and move it across the blue axis. And you can see that we didn't move the original blocks. We moved a duplicate set of blocks. So I'm going to lock this in, hold Alt E again, move this along the blue axis, and we have another set. So that's how you just move the blocks while creating duplicates. Now, rotation does work pretty much the exact same way, but it does have a bit of a nuance. So let's say I press Alt R. So this is going to duplicate while allowing us to rotate. And if you rotate, it's going to look a bit weird, right? Because now you have this structure where the new blocks are overlapping with the old blocks. And normally that's not what people are looking for when you want to duplicate. So you have to do a little bit of trial and error with the whole rotation thing. So let's say that I have my initial selection and I want to rotate the selection clockwise. What I can do is notice how this side has a length of 10. I'm going to make this a length of 30. So what we have now is 10 on the left side, 10 blocks for the right side, and 10 blocks for the middle. What this essentially does, it's a bit tricky to explain, but instead of the rotation happening just around this area, we've now made the center of rotation be the 10 blocks in the middle. So if I press Alt R and rotate now, I can just get the blue and rotate. You will see that we've rotated it counterclockwise, right? So the 10 blocks in the middle are the center of rotation, while you can see the sides are properly shifting clockwise. And so we can do it again, Alt R, get blue, and rotate it. And so that's how you rotate. Cool. So those are supposedly the basics of the selection tool, and they are already extremely powerful. There are a few more advanced things that we can do with the selection tool, but I'm going to leave that for the next video. But I hope this was helpful, and as usual, thanks to all of you who are checking out my videos. But with that, I'll see you guys in the next one.